On July 24th, 1944, Marines of the 4th Marine Division began landing on the small Pacific island of Tinian. Tinian would end up being very important to the Allied plans. Its airfields were close enough to Japan to allow bombardment of the home islands. In August of 1945, the Enola Gay took off from Tinian's North Field, headed for Hiroshima. And yet, in the war in the Pacific, the invasion of Tinian is nearly forgotten alongside names like Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and Guadalcanal. And the reason might be that the invasion of Tinian went just too well. And yet, the invasion of Tinian, Operation Forager, deserves to be remembered. Marine Corps Major Carl W. Hoffman explained the strategic situation in the Pacific in 1944 in a 1951 Marine Corps published history of the Battle of Tinian. Saipan Operation, 15 June to 9 July, signaling the beginning of the end, had pierced like a knife into Japan's outer defenses. Seizure of Guam and Tinian in the Marianas and Peleliu in the Palaus would twist that inserted blade, cutting vital arteries of the Japanese Empire. The island is not particularly large. The U.S. National Park Service explains Tinian has an area of about 39 square miles. For comparison, the Los Alamos National Laboratory is close to the same size, covering about 35 square miles. And Yellowstone National Park is about 10 times the size at 3,472 square miles. Tinian would, however, be important to American strategy, as it is just 5 nautical miles southwest of Saipan. Hoffman writes, Tinian, located 1,250-odd nautical miles south by southeast of Tokyo, was the minor portion of the Saipan-Tinian defense area. Together, the two islands constituted the key point of the Marianas defense. Just as U.S. planners mentioned Saipan and Tinian in the same breath and with the same strategical thoughts, the Japanese considered them as a single tactical locality in their outer ring of defense. The capture of Saipan thus nearly necessitated the capture of Tinian, Hoffman explains. For to have seized Saipan and not Tinian, or vice versa, would have been to invite the Japanese on the unconquered island to conduct extensive harassing activities and to observe U.S. operations and report them regularly to Tokyo. U.S. Marine Corps Reserve Major R.J. Brown commented in a 1984 article posted on the website of the Marine Corps Association. The island of Tinian lies just south of the southern tip of Saipan in the Mariana Islands. Its capture as a follow-up to the Saipan invasion of 1944 was obvious to both the Japanese and the Americans. The problem was not if or when, but only how to capture the island. But that would not necessarily be easy. General C.B. Cates, Commandant of the Marine Corps in 1951, explained, Tinian is a small island, and in 1944 it was held by only 9,000 Japanese. Yet it was so well defended by nature against an amphibious operation that it might have proved a formidable and costly barrier to the final conquest of the Marianas. It had only one beach area suitable by previous standards for a major amphibious landing, and that beach was heavily mined and skillfully defended. The Japanese forces defending the island were not insubstantial. Brown writes, in 1944, Tinian presented a formidable obstacle. Over 9,000 Japanese defenders were preparing to defend the island, and the American capture of Saipan gave them ample warning of what was ahead. The Japanese force comprised the battle-hardened 50th Infantry Regiment, a battalion of the 135th Infantry Regiment, the 56th Naval Guard Force, and assorted combat support units. This force was commanded by Colonel Kishi Ogata. Moreover, these forces knew full well that the attack was coming. Surprise would be difficult to achieve. But there were advantages for the Americans, notably the proximity to recently captured Saipan. Hoffman explains, operations could be conducted with less regard to the strategic air and naval situation than was the case in an overseas operation. Tactical plans were more flexible, and troops involved were not subjected to a lengthy, crowded, enervating voyage. In addition to the foregoing tactical considerations, several special logistical factors also existed. The total shipping required to transport and supply like-sized landing forces was less. Logistical plans were more flexible. Overwater supply lines were secure against disruption by hostile naval forces, and air transportation contributed more important and effective supply and evacuation support than is possible in an overseas operation. The island's interior was relatively flat, dotted with numerous sugarcane fields, and its coastline was characterized by steep coral cliffs. The only urban area on the island was built up around the sugar refinery and called Tinian Town. Reconnaissance of the island showed only 3 potential landing areas, one at Tinian Town, one at Asiga Bay, and one in the northwest corner near Ushi Point. The most favorable landing area in terms of terrain was the beach at Tinian Town. The beach at Asiga Bay was considered marginal because of the tide conditions and coral reefs. Two beaches were spotted in the area near Ushi Point, but both were extremely narrow, and coral reefs or small cliffs blocked portions of the approach lanes. This spurred a significant question. As Hoffman writes, the advantages accruing to an attacker using the Japanese neglected northwestern beaches had been at once recognized and appreciated by U.S. planners. All admitted from the outset that landings there should achieve tactical surprise. But one top commander opposed the use of the beaches, and others hesitated because of the extremely limited size of these areas. The studies and discussions on the subject led to the inevitable imponderable, with the advantages outweigh the disadvantages in the use of these small northwestern beaches. In the end, the decision was to use the smaller beaches to the northwest, codenamed White 1 and White 2, but with a twist. Brown writes, Colonel Carlson, the man who made the Chinese phrase gung-ho synonymous with Marine esprit de corps, urged a startling scheme of maneuver. He proposed that the 2nd Marine Division fake a landing on Tinian town to keep the Japanese busy, while the 4th Marine Division sneaked in the back door by landing across the minuscule beaches to the north. A convincing demonstration at Tinian town would tie up Japanese reserves during the crucial early hours of the landing and avoid the heavy concrete teeth Colonel Ogata had planted on the Tinian town beaches. Brown notes that the decision to land at the white beaches was not a rash gamble, but rather a calculated risk. The enemy's plans, preparations, and mindset were carefully studied. The risk was weighed against the potential gain. It was decided that if the enemy did fall for the ruse and was surprised by the Marine landings, he would be demoralized and placed at a physical and psychological disadvantage. Still, the decision was exceptional. Typically, American commanders tended to be cautious, and attacking the larger beaches near Tinian town was definitely the more conservative approach. Brown continues, as was expected, some more conservative officers rejected this plan as too daring and too controversial. It took the vociferous General H.M. Smith to convince them to accept the inherent risks and adopt the plan. There were, however, other considerations. First was fire support. As Hoffman explains, an important consideration in reaching the White Beach decision was that a landing there could be supported by artillery and placed on Saipan. This fact that Saipan, already captured, was close enough to provide artillery support for the landings, both distinguished this operation from other amphibious operations in the Pacific and helped to secure the decision to land at beaches closest to Saipan. But additionally, there was the force available. The attack would be made primarily by the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions. Both had been heavily involved in the fighting on Saipan, having taken more than 6,000 casualties each. While they had received some replacements, they were both still significantly under strength, limiting their ability to conduct a broader assault against the beaches in the south. Brown writes, each factor was carefully considered: the available fire support, the logistical burden of the terrain, and the weakened condition of the assault force that was tired from the Saipan campaign and had not been reinforced by sufficient replacements. In the end, the back door was judged the best possible scheme of maneuver for the forces available, because it was within the capabilities and exploited their strengths. Naval and air bombardment started in June, before even the invasion of Saipan, and gradually increased as more assets became available, until the day of the invasion, labeled J-Day or JIG. Even at night, destroyers and Saipan-based artillery annoyed the Japanese, Hoffman writes. Under these circumstances, it's not surprising that Japanese combat efficiency diminished somewhat. The need to maintain surprise for the landing beaches did impact the pre-invasion bombardment. Hoffman writes, the Tinian naval gunfire bombardment plan revolved around two fixed ideas: deception and destruction, and where there was a conflict between them, deception took priority. This meant that the fewest number of ships fired at the white beaches until the day before the invasion, when the battleship USS Colorado briefly targeted that sector to destroy some heavy guns that were, in Hoffman explains, admirably sighted to enfilade the white beaches, as well as defilated from the Saipan-based artillery. Hoffman writes, the battleship expended 60 16-inch shells and 1 hour and 45 minutes of time on the positions. This patient, systematic effort paid dividends, destroying all three of the big guns. But one advantage was the artillery on Saipan. Dr. Mike Krivdo, the U.S. Army Command historian, explains, the assault on Tinian was favored with the most prolonged preliminary artillery bombardment than any other Central Pacific island in the war. Much of this artillery support came from the Army, as Krivdo notes. Although many consider the Marianas landings, and especially the Tinian assault, as predominantly Navy Marine Corps operations, that oversimplification could not be further from the truth. Evidence of the Army's active participation can be found throughout the landing force, detailed to take Tinian. The proximity of artillery on Saipan gave an advantage in terms of preparatory bombardment, Hoffman writes. Specific targets in the northern half of Tinian normally became the destruction responsibility of the artillery, while air attacks were launched against enemy installations in the island's southern half. Naval gunfire undertook destruction of targets unsuitable to air or artillery at any point on the island. To facilitate the use of the artillery, Hoffman writes that in order that this support might strike the landing areas with maximum power, General Schmidt concentrated under one command all artillery of the landing force except 4 light battalions. Brown explains that the area that showed the most originality was that of task organization. The task organization of artillery for Tinian was truly unique and clearly showed the concern of the commanders for the principles of war. The availability of shore-based artillery support during the entire landing phase was the deciding factor in the task organization. By placing all of the stay-behind artillery under a single commander, the principle of unity of command was observed, and the mass fire of the 156 artillery pieces left on Saipan utilized the principles of mass and economy of force. Krivdo writes that the fire support was largely provided by the 24th Corps Artillery, consisting of 13 battalions with 156 guns. The artillery groupment consisted of 2 155mm gun battalions, 3 155mm howitzer battalions, and 8 105mm howitzer battalions, which provided a steady 24-hour-a-day firing on an average of 1,509 fire missions of 24,536 rounds daily. Hoffman explains the situation at Tinian permitted General Schmidt to spend ammunition lavishly, men economically. He exploited that situation throughout the operation. This turned out to be enormously effective. Hoffman says U.S. artillery was expertly coordinated and extremely effective throughout the operation. A Japanese prisoner testified pertinently in this connection. You couldn't drop a stick without bringing down U.S. artillery. Lighter guns, the 75mm pack howitzers, were assigned to the combat units, Hoffman writes. These allocations were designed to ensure the greatest punch at the decisive point. The landing force organization for combat at Tinian fully exploited organic flexibility and adaptability to fit the unusual circumstances. The Army also played a significant role in preparation for the landings, Krivdo explains. Operation Forager was planned, organized, trained for, and extensively rehearsed beforehand in select Hawaiian bases throughout Oahu, Maui, Kaho'olawe, and the Big Island, with new assault troops benefiting from the specialized training packages taught by soldiers at Army-run training facilities and schools purpose-designed and constructed to replicate the combat conditions anticipated in the Marianas. Their infantry, artillery, engineers, and tank crews mastered the techniques and procedures for reducing enemy obstacles and fortifications, practicing until perfection. After the campaign, many participants reflected on the high level of preparation for the campaign, saying it felt as though they'd experienced it all beforehand. Evidence of the planning also showed in an innovative device. Armored tracked amphibious LVT, landing vehicle tracked alligators, were modified to carry a ramp that could be used to scale the cliffs between White 1 and White 2. The landing began on the 24th, designated J-Day or JIG. It went spectacularly. The garrison was nearly completely surprised by the landings on the northwest. Brown writes, in the words of Sun Tzu, appear at places the enemy must hasten to defend. March swiftly to places where you are not expected. This concept was properly applied at Tinian. The feint of the 2nd Marine Division was meaningful because the enemy believed Tinian town would be attacked and drew his forces away from the actual landing area. Feints were used several other times in the Pacific, but most encountered little success because they did not present a believable scheme of attack. Tinian was truly a unique operation. Hoffman writes, Tinian produced a number of firsts in Pacific amphibious warfare. It was the first Corps-sized Marine shore-to-shore operation. It was the first time that the large Marine forces had landed on beaches the size of, and therefore with the limited capacity of, the Tinian landing areas. Thorough aerial reconnaissance by unit commanders prior to the amphibious operation was possible for the first time. It was the first occasion upon which combat troops were employed so shortly after another major operation. The operation saw the first combat use of the napalm bomb, a weapon that would later spread havoc among Japanese cities. The careful planning, preparation, and exploitation of the unique situation showed. Brown writes, the battle for Tinian took only 9 days. The Marines inflicted 6,050 casualties on the Japanese defenders, captured 250 Japanese soldiers, and interned 13,662 civilians. Marine losses were 290 killed, 1,515 wounded, and 24 missing in action. The Marine kill ratio, 20-1, was the best of any major operation in the Pacific. Based on mileage per day, Tinian was also the fastest moving Marine operation during the war, and a strategic victory of the greatest magnitude. The commander of the Expeditionary Troops, Marine General Holland M. Smith, evaluated the operation as follows. In war, as in every other phase of activity, there are enterprises so skillfully conceived and successfully executed that they become models of their kind. Our capture of Tinian, the southern sister island of Saipan, belongs in this category. If such a tactical superlative can be used to describe a military maneuver where the result brilliantly consummated the planning and performance, Tinian was the perfect amphibious operation in the Pacific War. And it set the stage for the rest of the war, Brown notes. Its flat field soon sprouted numerous airfields big enough to support the lumbering Boeing B-29 superfortresses, bombers that bombed Japan around the clock.
Tinian is sometimes called the forgotten invasion, and ironically that might be because it was so well planned, it simply went so well that it was overshadowed by the drama and massive casualties of battles like Iwo Jima and Okinawa. And to be fair, the Japanese garrison, while Krivdo argues fought tenaciously for every inch of ground, wasted much of their strength in ineffective mass counterattacks. Of the entire garrison, less than 500 survived the battle. But Tinian's success is exactly why it should be remembered. As Brown opined in 1984, what lessons can a battle fought 4 decades ago present to a commander with modern weapons? The answer is many. Navy Admiral Raymond Spruance summed up the forgotten invasion. In my opinion, the Tinian operation is probably the most brilliantly conceived and executed amphibious operation of World War II. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community at Locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.